Hey, what's going on, everybody? You are now tuned in to the Paging Dr. Chanda podcast, where we talk about all things related to mental health, wellness, and the culture. I'm your host, Dr. Chanda. I am a licensed clinical psychologist slash personality slash content creator slash, everything else that I like to do. Simply because I'm a believer that as a psychologist, I don't have to do one thing. Like, I can do multiple things, and that's okay. So thank you all for tuning into this week's episode. If you are listening to the audio version of this podcast on Wednesday when we drop, I need you to go into Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and I need you to go in and to rate this podcast a 5-star review and leave me a comment. Let me know how you're enjoying it, and also any questions or suggestions on what topics you want to address, we can certainly do that. All you got to do is just leave that in that section. I also want you to sign up for our text community. So all you have to do is text podcast to 21000. Again, that's podcast to 21000. And there you will get all the updates that we have going on pertaining to the podcast, the Paging Dr. Chanda podcast, the Double Dose podcast, as well as everything else that I have going on. I love to communicate with y'all there. I love the talk back that y'all offer there. So it's definitely been amazing just to kind of like have that community with you guys. Before I get into today's topic, we have Brown Girl Grinding, who actually sent us this little jersey dress. Y'all remember jersey dresses from the early thousands. Come on, don't act like y'all don't remember them. But Brown Girl Grinding sent us this jersey dress, and it's so cute. I actually posted it on my Instagram and TikTok page. So if you guys are interested in getting that, make sure that you hit up Lauren, my girl Lauren at TMZ who has her own platform at Brown Girl Grinding. And she's also from Delaware, so shout out to the Delaware baddies. So we're actually not gonna have a hot off the press segment today. I'm gonna hop into part 2 because I've been getting so much feedback from last week's episode about toxic relationships, what that looks like, and what do we do after we identify that a relationship is toxic. So I want to jump straight into that information. Today's going to be a little bit more condensed, but I just want to get those points out there. So I want you to, take notes, write them in your phone or a tablet if you need to. But last week, we identified ways to identify that a relationship is toxic. And when we said toxic, we meant harmful or detrimental to one's mental or emotional well-being, or physical, a mental, emotional, or physical, or spiritual well-being. So we're identifying toxic relationships, and we said that we can identify toxic relationships by feeling drained after spending time with that person, feeling like you have to walk on eggshells around them, feeling like they are always putting you down, feeling like they are never happy for your accomplishments. And one last one that I actually forgot to mention last week is feeling like the relationship is one-sided, right? So all of these signs of identifying a toxic or harmful friendship are things that we actually, this ain't things that we just pulling out of the air. This is actually based on research from the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships. And y'all know, like I said, when I say I do research, I'm not saying like, oh, I just looked on Google. No. Beloved is a psychologist, so I look at peer-reviewed articles. I'm looking at actual studies that people have done. So I'm providing you guys empirical information that has been obtained after doing studies on a population of people. Okay, so y'all ready for part 2? So now we're talking about what to do next. I've identified that some of these relationships are toxic, Dr. Chanda, so now what do I do? So this is probably one of the most difficult things when dealing with toxic relationships, because when we're talking about, people don't just, allow people to be harmful to them or detrimental to them in relationships. It usually is because there's some level of loyalty to that person, some level of longevity, or feeling as though, I can't move on from this relationship. So when we're going through these things, I don't want y'all to think that we're just like invalidating your experience. No, we very much recognize that these might be relationships that you've been in. These might be friendships that you've had since childhood. So it might feel very difficult and uncomfortable for you to hear this information. But first things first, the first step is to identify whether or not this relationship is toxic. And we just reviewed ways in which that an individual can identify ways that their relationship is toxic. So we're not going to spend too much time there because we already highlighted that in the last one. But the second step is to to communicate your boundaries. So after you identify the relationship is toxic and you want to save that relationship, the next step is to start communicating your boundaries, right? So I feel like boundaries has become another one of those buzzwords of, between 2020 to 2023. We just heard a lot of narcissism, gaslighting, trauma bonding, like all these things were like buzzwords in the community, in the TikTok social media community. But at the same time, it's really important for us to identify that like boundaries are still very much important, right? So even though it has been like kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It has been appropriated by mainstream media. It is also very much important for us to implement it into our daily lives. That's the word I'm looking for, appropriated. Yes. Okay. So it's important for us to communicate our healthy boundaries. So according to another journal, because y'all know I'm a consumer of research, beloved. So another journal also reinforced the importance of us communicating our boundaries, especially in relationships that we find harmful. When these boundaries are not communicated, then we are essentially allowing people to treat us any way that we like or any way that they like, right? Because our feelings ain't got nothing to do with it. So any way that person wants to treat us, they're entitled to do that if we are not setting our boundaries. That is why it is our responsibility to set boundaries with people, right? And so one of the ways that we do this is to be direct, clear, and specific about what behaviors you will and won't tolerate. So be direct, clear, and specific about the types of behaviors that you will not tolerate from that person. Right? So an example of this might include saying something like, I'm not comfortable with the way that you talk to me sometimes, and I need you to be more respectful if we're going to continue our friendship. I am not comfortable with the way you talk to me sometimes, and I need you to be respectful if I'm going to continue with this relationship. And if you're feeling really funky, I would probably encourage you to identify what respectful even means, right? Because it's easy to go into these relationships and have these hard conversations like, being respectful or disrespectful or whatever, and not really identify what respectful behavior looks like or what disrespect has looked like. Because it might be, this person might just be that type of person where they treat all their friends this way, and they might not even recognize that what they're doing to you is harmful. So you identifying the disrespectful behavior, you're clearly laying out to them what you don't appreciate. That way, if they do it again, this isn't necessarily a matter of them not understanding what your boundary is, but more so them disrespecting what your boundary is. And so that is why it's important for us to be clear, direct, and specific when communicating our boundaries when attempting to salvage toxic relationships. All right, so next. So we have to know and understand when it's time to end the friendship. So yes, we want to save the friendship. We want to set boundaries. But what happens if that same person keeps pushing on my boundaries? Beloved, it might be time for you to further assess, is this relationship worth staying in? Now, it's up to you, right? So I'm not your psychologist, so I can't say, even if I was your psychologist, I wouldn't say, you need to end this relationship with this person today. I would not say that because we have free will. Right? There are some people who might be able to function in harmful relationships. They might be harmed, but they don't see value in walking away from that relationship yet. Right? They might not see the value yet in walking away from that relationship. But if you find that there is value in you protecting your emotional health, spiritual health, even in physical health in some circumstances, if that is worth more than this friendship, it might be worth ending. So when thinking about ending friendships with individuals who you deem as toxic, if the friend is unwilling or unable to respect your boundaries, so that means you already said it, it was clear, it was direct, it was specific, and they keep pushing on those boundaries, and if the friendship continues to be emotionally draining despite your efforts, it might be time to consider ending that relationship. So some people have said that ending relationships have been difficult, or they feel as though they're not equipped with learning how to function outside of that relationship. But we have to keep in mind, when ending any sort of relationship, we are very much going through a grieving process, So what you're going through in terms of feeling lonely, feeling lost, it's not abnormal. People can go through the process of grief even when ending relationships with friends. It doesn't necessarily have to be death that causes grief. People grieve when they're going through a divorce. People can grieve going through separations. You can grieve ending a toxic relationship, right? So even though it's very much difficult, it does not necessarily mean that this is just specific to you. This is something that's very common when ending a relationship, but we have to keep in mind that, it is important to prioritize our own health. And we just said that being in toxic relationships not only can impact someone emotionally, because it can exacerbate depressive and anxiety symptoms, but it can also impact your overall life satisfaction. You start to see life through a negative lens when you continue to function in toxic relationships. You start to see people in other relationships who aren't even harmful to you through negative lenses because you are in a toxic relationships. That is how negative and detrimental toxic relationships are. It can significantly impact how you see yourself, other people, and the world. And lastly, when ending a friendship, or a toxic friendship, it's important to be honest, direct, and compassionate, and to avoid blaming or attacking the other person. So if you're going the route of ending the toxic friendship, the toxic relationship, keep in mind that we don't end relationships by being blameful, being, attacking, you did this, you did X, Y, and Z. Why? Because it's not going to, it's not going to resolve anything. And that's just going to lead to conflict, right? It's only going to lead to maybe an argument. So you don't have to say like the you statements. You can use the I statements. I teach my clients religiously. We use I statements when communicating difficult information. We say we bust the yous. We do not use you because using the word you is blameful. And when communicating this information, not only do we want to be unblameful, but we want to communicate it in a respectful way. Just because someone might disrespect you, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be disrespectful when ending the relationship. So I hope that information was helpful. That was part 2 of how to end toxic relationships. If this was helpful, I need y'all to post this into your stories, whether it was on TikTok, Instagram, or wherever else, Facebook, whatever. Put that in your stories and let me know how it has blessed you. Let me know your additional questions, and make sure that y'all are sending me questions through our text community because I enjoy reading and commenting on our questions. Y'all make sure y'all hit up Brown Girl Grinding. Like, again, they sent this, cute little jersey dress that I had a chance to post on my Instagram story and on my Instagram page. And so, yeah, y'all, it's Women's History Month. And don't forget, you have the power to create the emotions that you want to experience. God bless. Tune in next Wednesday.